Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I've just got myself a new guitar, and this is actually the first budget guitar that I own. It's a Jackson JS32 Warrior, and it costs £290. And in this video, I just wanted to see how much guitar do you actually get for that kind of money. Now, just as a disclaimer, of course I'll be going over both the good and the bad things about this guitar, but one thing to keep in mind is that it is a budget instrument, and I'm going to be nitpicky personally, for your sake, but we should always keep in mind the price range that this instrument sits in. So let's start off with aspects that affect your playing, since I assume that's what most of you are going to be interested in over the looks and the finish quality. First off, let's talk about the action. The action that this guitar came with straight out of the box was actually, I would say, very high. I've measured it, and at the low E it was at 2 millimeters, and at the high E it was 1.5 millimeters. And I think that this is an aspect that would greatly affect a beginner's progress, because they're unlikely to be able to make the adjustments to the action. I've done some minor adjustments to the guitar myself since receiving it. I've restringed it, I've adjusted the curvature of the neck to be very, very close to flat, and I've also adjusted the intonation of the guitar. And I've got the action quite a bit lower just by adjusting the curvature of the neck. Now it is at 1.75 millimeters on the low E and 1.25 millimeters on the high E, but I would still call this pretty high action. Now, there's a reason why I couldn't make another simple adjustment of the bridge height to make the action, get the action even lower, and that is because of the nut. And that brings me to the first negative point about this guitar, which is the nut. The nut is what I would say of very low quality. I have not handled other budget instruments like this, but I think that the nut here is actually the weakest point in this guitar. The strings do not properly sit in the grooves, especially the low E. You can see here protrudes quite a lot, and the strings all have kind of a different height of where they sit. And if you see over here, the D string actually sits so much lower that it's buzzing already at the earlier frets, even at this high action. So I can actually not adjust the action to be any lower without adjusting the nut. Now, thankfully, fixing this problem is both quite easy and quite cheap. A new nut will cost you probably around, a good one will probably cost you around £10. So it's not a very expensive upgrade, and I think it's going to make a huge difference. Now, going to a bit more of a positive note regarding the playability is the neck. The neck is very, very nice. I feel like it has maybe a slight finish, or maybe it is just very, very smooth wood. It has a nice shape as well. The neck construction of this is bolt-on, and I used to think that bolt-on necks were a disadvantage, but now I actually prefer them, definitely in terms of how they sound. And my Jackson Dinky, again coming back to my first guitar, it has a bolt-on neck. It's the only bolt-on that I own, and it's actually my favorite guitar for playability, which is, you know, a bit crazy because I've got two other significantly more expensive guitars. And if you're not convinced by my personal opinion, you can check out your own Guitar Hero's custom guitars construction. So for example, I looked at Steve Vai's custom guitars. They have bolt-on necks. I think Paul Gilbert's guitars also have bolt-on necks, but you can check out your own heroes. Now, another thing that I was actually also pleasantly surprised by is these fret inlays. From the pictures online, I thought that these were just plain white inlays, but they do actually have this mother of pearl look to them. I don't know what the material is. It's probably not mother of pearl, but they do look quite nice. All right, let's continue on the topic of playability, and next thing to look at is the frets. Now, I've gone over the frets with a fret rocker. I've checked their overall levels, and what I can say is that they're actually pretty good. I would say that the levels straight out of the box are pretty much consistent with the more expensive guitars that I own. However, the finish of the frets is a bit weird. The first thing that I noticed when I touched the string down to a fret is this scratchy feeling. I don't know if you can hear that, but that's something you're going to feel when you do vibratos or bend the strings. And I don't know if it's something that's going to disappear over time, but I don't remember feeling this with any of my other guitars. In addition, the crowning of the frets is actually not very consistent. There are a lot of quite flat spots, so the crowning job on the frets, I would say, is probably among the weaknesses here. Now, with regards to the tuning on this guitar, while tuning it up for the first time, then changing the strings, and changing the tuning, straightening the neck, and tuning again and again and again, I can't say anything bad about the tuners, but I can definitely still say something bad about the nut, and it remains a weakness here. Changing the tuning up and down, adjusting things, it's going to be a little bit of a pain. The strings get stuck in the nut to varying degrees per string depending on how deep they sit in it. And I can't actually tell whether any tuning inconsistencies that I've experienced are down to the tuners or the nut or both. And the tuning stability, if you actually stretch the strings, is perfectly fine. Speaking of the tuning, another very important thing that you should be concerned with is intonation. And the bridge is actually another one of those things that I thought was quite good about this guitar. It's really easy to adjust both the height of the bridge and the intonation. And the last thing to do with actual playability, although I'm not sure if you'd categorize this as playability, but it's the pickups. I think that the pickups sound all right. They're not fantastic, they're not terrible. Let me just show you how it sounds. Let's plug the guitar in. Play a couple of riffs. And by the way, I'm playing through my Quad Cortex, which has a Mark II C+ simulation running on it. So now that we're done with the playability stuff, let's get on to the looks and finish stuff. So to start off with, the body finish is very, very minimal. It's very bare. It almost feels like the guitar doesn't have a finish at all. That's kind of nice on one hand because it feels like wood. It feels like a sort of a living thing, I guess you could say. But on the other hand, it does feel like not much money or time has been put into it, so it doesn't feel expensive in that way. And the other thing about it is the fact that it dents very, very easily. I've just, picked it up and very slightly bumped it on my table, and it immediately created a dent. It came with a very, very minor dent. They're not extremely obvious and visible, and it's actually quite easy, I think, to get those kinds of dents out of the wood. You can check out wood steaming or getting guitar dents out of wood guides on YouTube, but that is definitely a thing to consider about the finish. And talking about the finish, the headstock finish as well, it feels also kind of cheap. It doesn't feel as deep, if you know what I mean. Now, next on the list is the neck binding, and it's very nice that it has a neck and headstock binding. That is usually kind of a premium feature. Here's just a quick comparison between the headstock finish of this Jackson and my first Jackson. You can see that the older Jackson has definitely a pricier, more refined look to it. And looking at the binding as well, it looks like a specialized material and it's quite a bit more well set, I would say. And the transition of binding into wood, on my older Jackson, it looks like the binding is actually a separate material, which it's supposed to be. And on this newer one, it almost looks like the binding is just a painted part of the fretboard. So going further down the guitar, the other slightly negative thing is this three-way toggle here. It's definitely not the way I prefer to have my pickup switching. The issue with this is because of the way it moves, you cannot immediately instinctively tell exactly in which plane you're supposed to move it. Now, the last thing I wanted to mention is just about the electronics cavity. It has some black paint on it that I suspect may be electrical insulation paint, but I don't know, and also the sides. Basically, it's not very well insulated, and in general, I've had some minor noise issues with it, and I think that's down to probably the pickups, the wiring, and lack of electrical isolation or insulation on the electronics cavity. And just out of interest, let's plug it in again and not play anything and see how that goes. So it's not perfectly silent. So for comparison's sake, and I don't know how this is gonna go, but let's plug in a different guitar. And again, let's go for my baby over here. And I don't... You can see it's not getting louder on its own, basically. Oh, and while we have this guitar in our hands, let's just quickly go over its value and how it compares to this newer one. Now, obviously, this guitar, as I said, it was 500 pounds when I bought it, so quite a bit more. And also, I bought this 12 years ago, and now I'm feeling like there's been quite a change in terms of the kind of value of instrument you're gonna get, or the quality of instrument you're gonna get between back then and now. And I guess back then, 500 pounds was probably a lot more. Nowadays, an equivalent instrument would probably cost 800 or more pounds, I would say. This guitar is definitely in a different league than that one in every sense, in the finish, in the quality of the hardware, in the pickups, and I absolutely love this guitar, actually. As I was saying, it's probably my favorite guitar for playability. But then again, I don't have that many. So then what is my conclusion for this guitar? Well, I think that for anyone who's used to higher quality instruments, like I guess I am, which I didn't really know about, but I think it's a little bit surprising, some of the lower quality finishes and stuff like that. But to be honest, I'm starting to really like this guitar, and after just having it for a couple of days, holding it, playing it a little bit, I'm really starting to get used to it, and I'm really loving the Warrior shape. And even the finish isn't really bothering me that much anymore. The only thing that I would say that is really, really like a jarring low quality thing is the nut. I would highly recommend that you replace the nut. It is a pretty easy operation. You can find lots of videos on YouTube on how to do it, and it doesn't cost much money at all to get a really, really nice nut that will greatly improve. I mean, it improves your tonal quality as well, your tuning stability, and just your experience playing and tuning the instruments, as well as your ability to actually set the action to a decent level. And in regards to the action, straight out of the box, I would expect you to do some adjustments on any instrument you buy. Maybe custom shop guitars that cost multiple thousands of dollars. I have no experience with those. Maybe they come set up better than your standard 1,000 pound guitars, but on standard guitars, you're gonna have to do some adjustments anyway. So if you're a beginner player, it's not like buying a slightly or even significantly more expensive guitar is gonna give you that much of a better starting point if you don't know how to adjust it. So if you are a beginner player, I would still recommend that if you have the budget for it, go for the highest spec guitar that you can afford without, try to make sure that you're not paying for like some gimmick features, not gimmick, but features that you're not going to be using. But in terms of, the very standard things like the hardware and the pickups, you're not going to go wrong paying as much as you can. So for example, if you can afford a 500 pound guitar, I would say don't buy a 300 pound guitar. But if what you can afford is 300 pounds and you want to start playing guitar, 100% go ahead. But make the best use of your money, because you can make this a much better instrument just by learning a few simple things on how to adjust it and replacing the nut. You'll just about double or triple the quality of your instrument right there. And by the way, the reason I bought this guitar is because I really wanted a Jackson Warrior, and a Warrior with the specs that I wanted, such as a hardtail and a bolt-on neck, in the mid to high range did not actually exist. So this was the only guitar available with the specs that I wanted. And my plan for this guitar is to turn it into my dream Warrior. And I'm gonna refinish the body and the headstock and upgrade pretty much everything that's upgradable. And of course, I'm gonna document it on this channel. So if you're interested in that, do stay tuned by subscribing. But anyway, that's it for this one. If you found this video helpful or entertaining, please leave a like and consider subscribing if you wanna see more content like this. See you in the next one.